Today we're looking at the work of Elioth Gruner. He was an Australian painter, and there's a lot of good Australian landscape painters that I knew nothing about until 8 to 10 years ago with the internet, making it a lot easier to find out about other artists that we wouldn't ordinarily have known anything about. But Elioth Gruner was born in 1882 and had an early start. He started taking painting lessons at the age of 12, but then his father died, older brother died, and he had to go to work full time as a draper. I'm not sure what that is, but he had 12-hour days, but still found time to paint in the evenings and on the weekends. So when we complain about really not having time to paint, we don't have any excuse compared to Eliot here. 12-hour days and then still painted. And early on, and he painted outside when he painted landscapes, plein air painter. And early on was very interested in early morning light. So a lot of the early paintings are these backlit early morning scenes. And what I like about his work is it's very value oriented. There are colors there. And the color helps to suggest the light, but it's his use of values, of course, that makes it work, which is what we talk about all the time. And you can see it here, the value changes from background to foreground. But the suggestion of light on the figures and the cattle and the long shadows from the early morning light, he does a real nice job of that. And not a lot of unnecessary detail. And he does that even more as he goes on. His work gets more pattern oriented, working with shapes and patterns, and but always good use of values. And I have a lot of his work here, so we're gonna kind of go through it. He didn't work real large. This looks big, but I read that it basically didn't work much bigger than 24 inches either way. He did a few real large ones, but not much. Painted outside mostly, so he didn't work real large. But again, the simplicity, some suggestion of detail to make it somewhat detailed or finished, but very simple. And what always stands out is the shapes, the large, dark pattern here and shape that kind of sets up the composition and pulls your eye through and around the composition, but not a lot of unnecessary detail. And always the atmosphere that's there. This is another one here, again, early morning, kind of backlit, and the effect of the value changes and the light that you get with backlit subjects. Everything vertical is dark, and flat is going to be a lot lighter. And then the slanted in the middle, those four planes, including the sky, that kind of set up the landscape. But always the suggestion of light here. Here's a very high-key painting. In other words, high-key being the lights are very light and the darks are lighter also. Everything's on a lighter scale rather than a low-key, which is very dark. Dark's even darker, and lights being kind of dark and heavy also. So very airy and atmospheric. And again, very simplistic. Or not simplistic, but simple. The shape of the trees, subtle color changes in the grass. No excess detail there. Oops, lost the brightness. Same thing here. This very high key, even though this looks real dark, it's still the background and middle ground, very, very high key. The real dark horses and figure there up front really pulls that forward and makes these lighter darks and lighter lights really stay in the background. And you notice also on these the brushwork. A lot of small, choppy brushwork, which I was always told to stay away from, but he does it very effectively here. It's not choppy and small that breaks up the painting too much, creates too much detail. It's just very effective in suggesting texture in this case, which you'll see in a lot of his paintings. The smaller brush strokes. Again, backlit, very simplistic, or I shouldn't say simplistic. Simplistic sounds childish, but very simple shapes. I really like the patterns of simple dark and light that he works with it. Gives it an abstract feel in a very representational painting, which is very helpful to understand. Abstract qualities and pattern and design really helps your realistic or representational painting. So learn to see in terms of pattern and shape that's a bit more abstract. Again, not a lot of color variation or detail, but very good values. And once your composition works, you can focus on pattern and values and make detail really simplistic. Another one here, again, backlit, and talks about his early work being very backlit early in the morning. So I'm assuming this is, 1916, this is early work. But if you can capture that light, where the light's coming from, using the larger value changes, then you don't have to do much detail. Or you can decide where you want it instead of having it everywhere. And he does a good job of that. He did go to Europe and spent, I think, about 3 years there painting, and came back with more of an appreciation for large shape and pattern. And this is one of those here where it's more about the pattern and design than it is even about the light. We'll see some of those. You can really see a difference in his early work and later work. This one, you can see the short, choppy brushwork here in the water. Real effective. It's more about the value change than it is the brushwork, but I kind of like the brushwork too. But again, that big, simple pattern of dark and light, not a lot of detail, but things work well. And you can find the shadow pattern on the trees and the cast shadows on the ground and on the mountains, and work those shadows into bigger patterns and shapes. It makes the painting work a lot better. Because things always work better when they're more simple. They don't work better when it's more detailed, more broken up. So if you can suggest the light in simpler patterns and less detail, it's just going to be a lot more effective. Same thing here, a lot of detail in here, but everything else is kept real simple. So a lot of detail can work if it's selective and in one area that you want to stand out the most. But no need for leaves in the trees here, it's just shape and pattern. And this obviously is not early morning. You don't have those long early morning shadows. Things are a bit flatter, more of a flatter landscape, but still strong value changes that suggest that midday light. Nice color change in here, kind of the same value, but just different colors. So he's not changing the value here, which is what detail is. A lot of small value changes is detail. And he doesn't have that here. It's just big, kind of a flat area with subtle color change. Works real well. Another early painting, I'm assuming because it is backlit, early morning. Again, the small, choppy brush strokes that show some color change and maybe a little bit of subtle value change, but not detail. So I really like that choppy brushwork in here that doesn't break up the painting too much. Too often when we see small, picky brush strokes, not picky, but small, choppy brush strokes like this, we're showing way too much detail, but he's not doing that there. He's just showing a texture. Same value, just subtle color, subtle temperature change also. But nice simplistic shapes and pattern. Here you can see really strong pattern in the background, designing these patterns so they go back, kind of break up the background real well. Same thing in the foreground with the shape and pattern of the trees. Probably later painting, but still that strong suggestion of light and atmosphere because of his use of values there. Nice, clear, atmospheric day. Another early painting, that early morning light, the backlighting, which he does real well. All the detail is in the trees, some in the foreground. Background kept very simple. And that's what separates the background from the foreground, is the simplicity and the subtle value change, lack of detail in the background, and keeping all the detail in the foreground. And Gruner died at 57, had trouble with alcoholism, and I think he died of liver and kidney failure, but very productive before that. Here also, again, not early morning, more midday, that flat type of lighting. But he's using the value changes of the big shapes, the sky, the slanted mountains, the vertical trees being darkest, and then, of course, the flat being the lightest next to the sky. Sky always the lightest in this type of lighting. A couple more here. Again, just this shows the simplicity, but you can still get a lot of atmosphere and depth. The early morning fog, so not a lot of clear definition or cast shadows. But again, you can suggest and show a lot with a little. And to me, that's always kind of the goal. If I can suggest without overdoing it, to me, that's more successful painting, which is what I struggle with, trying to suggest more with less. We don't need a lot of detail to show what's going on with the light. There's a very subtle, it looks like late afternoon, trees here in shadow, and a little bit of sunlight here on the mountains, and using that contrast of warm and cool. But it's not a real strong contrast, it's subtle, but still works. The darker, cooler trees and the lighter, warmer mountains. It's pushing the contrast there, but very subtle here. And again, the short, choppy brush strokes, more to suggest texture and some subtle color change rather than detail. But after he died, he kind of fell into obscurity. I think he's read where he's making a little bit of a comeback, but died in, 39, I think, which was, by then, modernism was very popular. And as soon as he passed away, his popularity really faded, and modernism has taken over. But I think now, as there's more appreciation of plein air painting and representational work, he's making a comeback, like a lot of artists are from that era.